Population Genetics, Chapter 25. What is population genetics? It studies the genetic structure of individual populations and how it evolves and changes over time. It investigates factors such as population size, migration, genetic drift, and natural selection influencing the genetic variation in a group of individuals. Genotypic frequencies help define the gene pool of an individual population and help study genetic variation among organisms. To calculate genotypic frequency, find the sum of the number of individuals possessing a specific genotype and divide it by the number of individuals in a sample, noted by the letter N. Here are examples of the frequency equation using both homozygous and heterozygous genotypes. Note that the sum of all genotypic frequencies should always equal 1. Fewer alleles than genotypes are found in a gene pool of a population. Alleles, not genotypes, are passed from generation to generation. There are two ways to calculate allelic frequency. The first way is by the number of genotypes. To calculate frequency, find the number of duplicate copies of a specific allele in a sample and divide by the total of all duplicate alleles in the sample. For a locus with two alleles, the frequency is shown by P and Q. Note that P plus Q equals 1. The second calculation is using genotypic frequency. Find the sum of the frequency of the homozygotic allele and half the frequency of the heterozygotic allele. Frequency is also shown by P and Q. And note that the sum of all allelic frequencies should always equal 1. To calculate allelic frequencies using loci with more than two alleles, count the duplicate copies of an allele by adding 2 times the heterozygotic alleles and divide this sum by 2 times the sample size. If you have 3 alleles and 6 genotypes, the frequency is shown by P, Q, and R. You can also use genotypic frequencies by adding the homozygotic frequency to half of each heterozygotic genotype frequency. To calculate the allelic frequency of the X-linked loci, find the number of duplicate copies of the allele and multiply by 2. Add the number of heterozygous females and the number of male alleles. Divide all by the total number of alleles. You can also use genotypic frequencies by adding the frequency of the homozygote to half the frequency of the heterozygote and the frequency of the hemizygous male. Hardy-Weinberg law and implications. How does reproduction affect frequencies found in a gene pool? His law states, if the population is large enough, mates randomly, and not affected by mutation, migration, or natural selection, then allelic frequencies in a population will not change. And genotypic frequencies will not change after one generation in proportions of p squared, 2pq, and q squared. If all of these conditions are met, the population is said to be at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. However, a population cannot evolve if it meets these criteria. Reproduction cannot prompt evolution alone. So what can bring about the evolution of a population? Mutation influences genetic variance at the expense of another. Migration or gene flow introduces genes from other populations. Genetic drift deviates from expected frequency ratios caused by limited resources, founder effect, or genetic bottleneck. Natural selection states adaptive traits yield more fit offspring.